Darnell Cross was 38 years old, and for 9 years he had been the kind of man his wife's mother described to her church friends as Monique's husband. Never by name, always by category. Always with the slight pause of a woman who had wanted something different for her daughter and had never found a graceful way to conceal it. Evelyn Tate had said it plainly at Easter dinner 7 years ago, when she believed Darnell was still in the kitchen, that Monique had married beneath herself, that a man who spent his 20s in training would spend his 40s catching up, that he would die broke before he ever built anything real. Someone at that table had heard every word. Someone had told him. He had not said a word about it then or since. Monique had been planning her exit for 14 months before Darnell found the first document. She had transferred $52,000 from accounts he had believed were joint into a structure her attorney had quietly arranged. She had told her mother before she told anyone else. Evelyn had not discouraged her. What neither of them had ever thought to ask, not in 9 years of Sunday dinners and quiet dismissals, was what Darnell Cross actually did between 7 in the morning and 7 at night. 8 months after the divorce was finalized, Evelyn Tate walked into the lobby of Cross Cardiology Group on Peachtree Road in Atlanta and gave her name to the receptionist. The referral in her hand bore the name of a physician at Emory. The name on the wall behind the front desk bore a different one entirely. She recognized it immediately. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The light in Darnell's kitchen came in from the east, and he had oriented the breakfast table that direction specifically when he had the house renovated 3 years prior. He was up before 6 most mornings, coffee in hand, reviewing patient charts on the tablet while the neighborhood settled into the sound of Atlanta waking up around him. He was a cardiologist. He thought about hearts for a living, about what sustained them, what compromised them, what quiet failures accumulated over years until the body could no longer compensate. He had come to believe this was not entirely a medical observation. His grandmother Cora had told him something once, in the last year of her life when he was a third-year resident running on 4 hours of sleep and sitting in her kitchen at midnight with nothing left. She had poured him a glass of sweet tea and looked at him steadily and said, "Baby, a man who knows how the body works knows how everything works. You just have to be patient enough to let things show you." He had not fully understood it then. He understood it now completely. The house on Cascade Road was a Craftsman 4-bedroom that Darnell had bought before the marriage and renovated over 2 years. New foundation reinforcement, a kitchen expansion, a covered porch he had designed himself with the help of an architect friend. He had done significant framing work with his own hands on the weekends, which Monique had initially found endearing and later found puzzling, as though the fact of a physician choosing manual labor was a category error she had never fully resolved. He kept his tools organized in the garage in the specific way his grandfather had taught him, everything in its place, labeled, accessible. On the third shelf of the garage cabinet, inside a fireproof lockbox, was a file that Monique had never opened, because she had never known it existed. Inside it was the operating agreement for Cross Cardiology Group, the private practice he had established 6 years ago with 2 partners, which had grown into a 4-location cardiology network with a physician staff of 11 and an annual revenue that his accountant Priscilla had described, at their last quarterly review, as a strong argument for additional real estate investment. Monique knew he had an office. She did not know he owned the building. He had met her at a Morehouse fundraiser during his fellowship year. She was finishing an MBA, and she was incisive and funny, and carried herself with the self-possession of someone who had never had to perform for approval. He had been drawn to that quality immediately. They married 2 years later, which her mother Evelyn had announced at the rehearsal dinner was the only thing about the arrangement she approved of. Evelyn was a woman of decided opinions about what her daughter deserved, and those opinions did not include a man still building his career at 31. She had communicated this consistently in the polished, indirect language of a woman who had practiced being cutting while maintaining plausible deniability. The Easter dinner comment had reached him through his cousin Tamara, who had been seated at that table and texted him the next morning with the apologetic specificity of someone delivering news they believe the recipient deserves to have. He had read it. He had set his phone down. He had gone to work. Monique came downstairs that Tuesday morning in October, dressed for the office, already in motion, coffee in hand, phone in the other. She kissed his cheek without breaking stride and asked if he was at Northside or the Peachtree location. He told her, Peachtree. She nodded and went to the counter and stood with her back partially turned, typing something with a focus that the message did not seem to require. He noticed the second phone in her jacket pocket, just the edge of it, a different case than the one she always used. He did not say anything about it. The incoming signal arrived that same afternoon in the form of a letter on the kitchen counter when he came home at 6:30, an attorney's letterhead, addressed to Monique, already opened, left their face up in the way that people sometimes leave things they want found or things they have stopped being careful about. He read it once standing in his coat. Then he set it down and changed clothes and came back and read it again. It was not yet a filing. It was preliminary correspondence, a reference to the marital estate, and a term he recognized from enough colleague divorces to understand its full implication. Lifestyle analysis. Someone was building a picture of his income. Someone had been building it for some time. He did not react. He went to the office the next morning 45 minutes early, sat at his desk, opened his personal laptop, and began to work through what he had and what he needed. He was a cardiologist. He understood that when something had been wrong long enough, there was always a record. The body kept its own documentation whether you wanted it to or not. The joint account statements came first. He pulled 18 months and laid them against a legal pad, organized by date. What emerged was a pattern of withdrawals so carefully spaced they were almost elegant, consistent enough to be intentional, varied enough to avoid automatic flagging. Over 16 months, the total was $52,000. He confirmed it 3 times. He photographed every page and sent the files to a folder on his personal server. His hands did not shake. His face remained perfectly calm. The second phone had appeared in Monique's possession approximately 5 months ago, based on his recall. He went back through the shared household calendar and mapped every occasion she had cited for evening absences and weekend commitments. A long weekend in Charleston she had described as a trip with college friends, 3 overnight work dinners, a Saturday conference in Athens. He cross-referenced these against the withdrawal timestamps and against specific evenings when she had been home but visibly somewhere else in her attention. The pattern covered 14 months. A colleague's husband, a man named Tyler Drummond, a wealth manager with a Buckhead office, had been at 3 of the last 4 social events Darnell and Monique had attended together. Darnell had noticed him the way you notice something that doesn't quite fit the load-bearing logic of a structure. Not alarming in isolation, but worth noting in combination with other readings. He was attentive in ways that were slightly too calibrated. Monique laughed at his comments a beat too quickly. Darnell had filed this observation and said nothing. He looked Tyler Drummond up on a Wednesday morning and made several phone calls, not to people who knew Tyler socially, but to people who knew his professional standing. What he heard from 2 separate sources was that Tyler's firm had recently lost a significant client portfolio to a regulatory review, that the firm was restructuring, and that his personal finances were, in one source's phrasing, complicated in ways his clients didn't know about. He was a man who needed something from someone. Darnell wrote this down. He kept it. On a Thursday evening, he was coming up the back stairs from the garage when he heard Monique's voice through the partially open study door, not elevated, not arguing, just talking with the clipped efficiency of someone managing a logistics problem. He stood on the landing and listened for 90 seconds. He heard his own name once. He heard the word timeline. He heard her say the preliminary work was done and that Evelyn thought the sooner the better. He heard his mother-in-law's name. He stood on the landing for another moment. Then he walked back down the stairs, through the kitchen, out to the covered porch he had designed and built, board by board, and sat in the chair there for 20 minutes while the Atlanta evening settled around him. Then he went inside and called his attorney. "Victoria," he said when she picked up, "I need you in the morning. Bring the practice documentation. All of it." Victoria Ose had practiced family law and medical asset protection in Atlanta for 16 years, and she had built her reputation on a specific competency. She was exceptionally good at preventing people from taking things they were not entitled to. She was direct, thorough, and had an expression during client meetings that suggested she found most attempted financial maneuvering almost refreshingly predictable. She reviewed Darnell's documentation on a Friday morning and turned pages with the brisk efficiency of someone assembling a known structure. "The practice is protected," she said without looking up. "Premarital establishment, separate capitalization maintained throughout, partner agreements intact. Her attorney is going to argue co-mingling on the basis of household income, and they are going to lose that argument with a well-documented corporate veil. She set down the withdrawal summary. The $52,000 is the more interesting conversation. This was structured, deliberately structured. She looked at him. That changes the character of the proceeding. What does it change it to? Darnell asked. From a divorce? Victoria said evenly, to something her attorney is going to strongly advise her not to pursue aggressively. She told him to gather full tax documentation for 5 years, the practice operating agreements, and a summary from Priscilla. She told him to continue his normal routine without altering a single habit. He had already been doing all of those things. Some doors you don't open, you document them and wait. His uncle Chester lived in a split-level in Decatur and had known Darnell since before Darnell knew himself, had been at every graduation, every milestone, had sat in a hospital waiting room the night Darnell's mother had her surgery, and had not left until the news was good. He was 67, retired from 30 years in municipal infrastructure, and he had the particular quiet of a man who had watched a great deal play out and had very few illusions left about human nature. He listened to everything Darnell told him over coffee on a Saturday morning, and then was still for a long moment. I was at that Easter dinner, Chester said finally. I heard the broke comment myself. Didn't know if Tamara had said anything. He reached into the drawer beside the kitchen table and turned his phone toward Darnell. It was a text exchange with his own daughter from 3 months ago, describing a conversation she had overheard at a gathering at Evelyn's house. Monique and her mother had been in the kitchen. The substance of it was that the exit was being planned, that Evelyn had connected Monique with the attorney, and that Evelyn's expectation was that Darnell would not have sufficient assets to contest anything meaningfully. She still thinks you're a resident, Chester said. She built her picture of you in 2015 and never once updated it. He put his hand on Darnell's arm for a moment. Your grandmother used to say, a man who knows how the body works knows how everything works. He looked at his nephew. She meant you specifically, even when you weren't in the room. Darnell drove home by a longer route than necessary. He needed the time. The forensic financial work that Victoria's associate Marcus, a CPA with 20 years in matrimonial asset tracing, completed over the following 10 days, was precise and sourced and immovable. The $52,000 was mapped to the day, each withdrawal cross-referenced against Monique's calendar, her stated locations, and the credit card records Victoria had subpoenaed. The pattern pointed unambiguously to structured concealment. A review of Tyler Drummond's financial disclosures, available through the regulatory proceedings his firm had undergone, showed a man whose personal net worth, once liabilities were properly applied, was negative. His professional standing was under active review. He had nothing to offer anyone except the performance of having something. That Saturday evening, Darnell made his grandmother Cora's jerk chicken from the card she had written out for him in her careful handwriting the year he left for college, and he and Monique ate together at the kitchen table he had refinished with his own hands 4 years ago. She talked about a work presentation, a friend's birthday, the grocery list. He listened. He answered. He cleared the table. He was a cardiologist. He knew that the heart's electrical system operated on precise timing, that the difference between a steady rhythm and an arrhythmia was often invisible until the moment it declared itself. He had learned to wait for the declaration before acting. Preparation is the work. The mediation was scheduled for a Tuesday morning at the offices of Monique's attorney, a fourth-floor suite on Peachtree Street that carried the specific aesthetic of a firm that believed its decor should imply it had never lost. Victoria had suggested the venue. Let them be comfortable on their own ground. Let them believe they had arranged the room. Darnell arrived in what he wore on hospital teaching days. Dark slacks, white dress shirt, his ID lanyard still looped through his jacket pocket the way it always was. He sat across the table from Monique and her attorney and placed Victoria's leather portfolio flat on the table before him. Monique looked composed. Her attorney, whose name was Slade, had the practiced ease of a man who had pre-written the narrative of the morning. Slade opened with the lifestyle analysis. He presented a picture of shared income, shared household, a medical practice whose earnings had sustained the marital standard of living. He used the word commingling 4 times in 8 minutes. He was thorough. He was also working from a financial snapshot that did not include a single document from Victoria's filing. Victoria let him finish. Then she opened the portfolio. The Cross Cardiology Group operating agreement, Founded 6 years before the marriage. Partner equity unaltered by any marital transaction. Corporate accounts cleanly separated throughout. She laid it on the table with the calm of a person placing a card they have been holding for the right moment. Then the tax summaries. Then the practice real estate documentation. 4 clinical locations, 2 owned outright through the Practice LLC, 1 in a trust established in Darnell's name prior to the marriage. Slade's composure did not collapse. It simply became effortful. Then Victoria placed the withdrawal summary, 43 pages, annotated, $52,000 across 16 months. Structured, documented, cross-referenced against location data and the calendar Monique had maintained on the household tablet, several entries of which placed her in proximity to Tyler Drummond's Buckhead office on 8 dates that aligned precisely with withdrawal activity. Monique went very still. Victoria spoke for another 3 minutes. She described exactly what the filing would look like if the proceeding became contested. She used the word structured twice, with the specific legal weight that word carried in a proceeding of this nature. She said it without drama, without elevation, the way you report a lab result, factually, completely, without embellishment. Slade asked for a short recess. When they returned, Monique looked at Darnell with an expression that was not quite apology and not quite anger. It was the expression of a person who has understood too late that they have misread every variable in a situation they believed they had fully controlled. She started to speak. "I know what you're going to say," Darnell said quietly. He had not raised his voice once in that room. He had not raised his voice once in the entire preceding months. "I want you to understand that I am not here because I am angry. I'm here because I built something, and I intend to leave this room with what I built." Monique said it had not been meant to go this way. She said things had become complicated. She said his name the way a person says something they have been holding a long time, and it sounded different from how it had sounded in years. Heavier and too late. Slade placed a hand on the table. "I believe we can reach a fair resolution this morning." Victoria looked at him. "I think so too. You'll find the terms in Section 4 are already quite fair." He looked at Monique for one long, unhurried moment, the look of a man who has examined the full anatomy of a thing and arrived at the other side of it intact. "I examined a great many hearts before I understood what makes them fail," he said. "It's almost never the dramatic event. It's what you allow to go unaddressed for years." He picked up his jacket. "Take care of yourself, Monique." He walked out of the 4th-floor suite, down the elevator, and out onto Peachtree Street into a morning that was cold and clear and entirely his own. 8 months passed like clean water over stone. The receptionist at the Peachtree Road location called back to the physician's suite at 11:45 on a Wednesday to let Darnell know that a referral walk-in had been seated in the lobby. The name on the Emory referral was Evelyn Tate. The referring physician's note indicated a recent abnormal EKG and a strong family history of cardiac events. Standard routing to the nearest network cardiologist. He stood at the door of his office for a moment. His front desk manager, Sylvia, a precise woman who ran the lobby with the efficiency of a flight controller, had told him that the patient had walked in, given her name, and gone very still when she read the name on the wall behind the reception desk. He walked to the lobby. Evelyn Tate was seated by the window in her coat, a woman in her late 60s with Monique's posture and a careful arrangement of composure that was working considerably harder than usual. She looked up when he came through the door. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Mrs. Tate, Darnell said, in the same register he used with every patient. Direct, unhurried, without agenda. "Let's get you taken care of." He reviewed the EKG with the full attention he gave every patient, ordered the appropriate follow-up studies, and explained everything in the plain language he had learned from his grandmother. Not simpler than the facts required, exactly as clear as the person in front of him needed. He was thorough, he was professional, he was as he had always been precise. When it was finished and she stood in the doorway of the exam room with her coat buttoned, Evelyn looked at him with an expression that had more layers in it than he was going to examine. "You're good at this," she said. "I know," he said. And then, because he was not a man who carried things he had already set down, "You'll want to schedule your follow-up with Dr. Anand. He's the best I have for the monitoring cadence you need. Sylvia will get you set up at the front." He handed her the referral slip and walked back down the hallway to his office. Cross Cardiology had added a 5th location in Marietta in June. The hospital affiliation agreement with Piedmont had been signed in September. Priscilla had used the word acceleration at their last quarterly meeting, which was not a word she used without precision. He had endowed a scholarship at Morehouse for pre-med students from the West Side neighborhoods, endowed it in his grandmother Cora's name, because that seemed correct, and because she deserved the credit she had never received in the rooms where it should have been given. Jade had asked him on a Sunday morning over coffee in the garden of the Cascade Roadhouse what his grandmother had been like. He had taken a moment and then told her all of it, the sweet tea at midnight, the steadiness, the sentence about knowing how the body worked. Jade, who was a reconstructive surgeon with a midtown practice, and the specific patience of someone who spent her days building things back from damage, had listened to every word without hurrying him along. She was not performing warmth. She was simply warm. He had come to understand, in the 8 months since the mediation, that this was the most important difference there was. He sat on the covered porch that evening, while the last light finished with the day and the garden he had planted along the fence line moved in the small wind. The Japanese maple in the far corner was deep in its second autumn, the leaves going the color of old copper. The tomatoes had been extraordinary this year, splitting at the seams with their own weight. He had built everything worth keeping. He was free, he was solvent, he was unbothered. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.